There's no scream on the footage. No blood, no fight. Just her, a woman in a dark suit, and him on the kitchen floor. She checks his pulse with 2 fingers, then walks to the stove, comes back, looks at her watch, and waits. 18 minutes, long enough to understand death didn't just happen here. It was endured. The question came without preamble, without formalities, without the customary pause meant to let a man catch his breath. Liam Ward, did you wish Arthur Croft dead? The recorder was already running. A manila folder with the name Croft lay perfectly centered on the desk, unmoved, unopened. On top of it sat a few printed pages, the text facing the detective. Detective Miles Corbin wasn't looking at the pages. He was looking at Liam. The office was small, with a single window overlooking an inner courtyard. The gray morning sky beyond the glass offered nothing to hold his gaze. The radiator was on, but the air felt damp, or maybe that was just his imagination. Liam bit the inside of his cheek. Corbin waited. He had a way of being silent with such confidence that the silence itself felt like a conversation. A pen lay parallel to his notepad. Not a single wasted motion. No, Liam said finally. The word came out flat, devoid of intonation. He added nothing more. No explanation, no excuse, no attempt to soften it. Just no. Corbin narrowed his left eye slightly. All right, he said. Then let's go through it step by step. The detective had his own way of doing things, his own order. Entry into the community, 8:14 p.m. Kevin Bailey, the security guard, logged your plate. The gate camera confirms it. Exit, 9:02 p.m., also in the log. Corbin spoke without rushing, as if reading a train schedule aloud. The 911 call was made at 9:40 p.m. by Anna Croft. The time of death was confirmed at 9:47 p.m. He paused. You were the last person to see Arthur Croft alive, besides his wife. The words lined up neatly, tightly, with no gaps in between. Liam listened and understood. It wasn't about being accused. It was about the timeline, a closed loop. He'd arrived, they'd argued, he'd left. 38 minutes later, a body. There was no room for coincidence in that equation. Tell me, Corbin said, who initiated the meeting? The phone had rung at 6:37 p.m. Liam was just finishing the demolition of a partition wall in an old apartment on King Street. The dust was thick, so he stepped out into the stairwell to answer. Anna's voice was level, not fast, not quiet, just steady. We need to clear this up tonight. Arthur's tired of it. Liam leaned against the cold wall of the landing. The plaster was flaking off right behind him. Tired of what, exactly? You know. He knew, or he thought he did. The outstanding payments on the contracts, the drawn-out conversation he and Arthur had been putting off for 3 weeks. Anna speaking for her husband, it wasn't the first time. It seemed normal. Tonight, she added. It would be better if you came. Not if you want to, not when you can. It would be better if you came. Liam rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked up at a crack in the stairwell ceiling, a jagged line running from the corner to a ventilation grate. I'll be there by 8. Anna hung up without saying goodbye. He went back into the apartment, picked up the sledgehammer, and continued breaking down the wall. Anna Croft, Liam said. She called. Corbin wrote it down, made a period, turned the page. Did you hesitate? Liam looked past him, at the window, at the gray courtyard. A little. But you went. I went. Kevin Bailey manned the security gate with the air of a man who never missed a thing. He'd written down the license plate number before Liam's car had even come to a complete stop, his hand already reaching for the logbook. Liam got out of the car quickly, without a backward glance. No greeting. Bailey would remember that. Later, during his interview, he would describe Liam's movements as sharp and agitated. That word, agitated, would appear in the official report 3 times. Back then, Liam was just walking up the road to the house. Gravel crunched under his feet. The gated community looked uniform in the twilight. Pale fences, identical streetlights, the kind of silence that only money can buy, distance from the sound of other people's voices. Arthur lived on a rise. From his windows you could see the city, the projects, the smokestacks of the old factory, the lights on Main Street. Liam had spent 34 years down there. Arthur had spent his last 5 up here. Liam pressed the intercom button. The door buzzed open instantly, as if someone had been waiting by the monitor. Arthur was in his study. He was standing behind his desk, not sitting, and he didn't offer Liam a seat. On the desk were some documents and a glass of water. He started without preamble, just like Corbin had that morning. But the tone was different. The detective's was flat, Arthur's was businesslike, then condescending. The difference between a scalpel and a hammer. The riverfront project isn't closed out. It's been 3 weeks. Arthur looked at the papers, not at Liam. I covered for you with the client, blanked it on my own suppliers. I know. You know. Arthur finally looked up. And yet you still didn't get it done. There was a problem with the materials. Everyone has problems. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt. I helped you when you were just starting out, gave you a contract, ran it through my company. I remember. Good. Arthur picked up one of the sheets from his desk, glanced at it, and put it back down. Because some people seem to think that if you help them once, you owe them forever. That's not how it works. His voice was even. No anger, no particular pressure. Just a statement of fact. But that very evenness was the blow. It meant that, for him, the conversation was already over. He was simply announcing the verdict. Liam stood by the door. The light in the study was yellow. The desk lamp cast a long shadow to one side. The air smelled of paper and something medicinal, faint, barely there. I'll take care of the debt, Liam said. I already took care of it. I wrote it off. Arthur adjusted his cuff again. I don't need the money. I need people to understand who they're working with. The word people was delivered in a way that made it clear to Liam that he wasn't included in that category. Not as a partner. Not as an equal. He took a step forward. Look, you could have just said you didn't want to work together anymore. Without all this, I'm saying it directly. No, you're giving me a lecture. Arthur looked at him with a flicker of surprise, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly talked back. There's no need to raise your voice. I'm not raising my voice. Your tone. Arthur stepped out from behind the desk. Watch your tone. Later, Liam couldn't recall the exact sequence of events. Arthur's step forward. The gesture, not threatening, more dismissive, a hand held out flat. A push to the chest, not hard, just for show, the way you'd shove a chair out of the way. Something inside him switched. He grabbed Arthur by the collar. The fabric of the shirt, thick, expensive, tightened in his fist. Arthur jerked back, a chair toppled over, and papers slid off the desk, scattering across the floor. A few seconds of hard, silent pressure, breathing in each other's faces. Then Anna appeared in the doorway. She didn't scream. She didn't make a single move. She just stood there in the entrance to the study, her hands clasped in front of her, and watched. Not at Arthur, at Liam. He loosened his grip. Arthur smoothed down his shirt, rubbing his neck. The silence in the room was thick. You were useful, Arthur said. Nothing more. The sentence was delivered without anger, calmly, as if he were merely clarifying a fact. That's what made it unbearable. It wasn't a weapon. It was an assessment. Final. Recorded. Liam let go of the shirt collar. Useful. Nothing more. He turned and walked out of the study. Anna was standing by the kitchen island. The countertop was white, clean. Nothing out of place. Liam walked toward the front door. In his peripheral vision, he saw her profile. Straight back, hands resting on the countertop. Then she lowered her gaze to her wrist. She looked at her watch. He noticed the movement even then. At the time, it had seemed like simple coldness, a familiar detachment, a wife observing someone else's argument in her own home, just waiting for it to be over. The door slammed shut. The gravel crunched under his feet again. The sky had darkened, a flat, featureless gray. In his logbook, Kevin Bailey noted the time of departure, 9:02 p.m. Liam sat in his car for a minute without starting the engine. His hands rested on the steering wheel. His fingers were trembling slightly, a normal after-effect of stress, nothing new. He clenched his fists, then opened them. Then he started the car and drove out of the community. "So," Corbin said, "after you left, you had no further contact with Mr. Croft?" "No." "No text messages?" "Not after 8 o'clock, no." Corbin opened the folder. He turned over one of the pages and placed it in front of Liam. It was a printout of a text exchange. The date was from 2 weeks before Arthur's death. Liam's eyes scanned the text, finding the highlighted line. "Sometimes it feels like it would be easier if he were just gone." His own words. He'd sent that to Anna, in a different context, during a different conversation. They had been talking about how Arthur was pressuring the subcontractors, how it was easier to just drop that line of work than to explain every single step to him. It was about business, but the line, stripped of its context, read differently. "That's not what you think," Liam said. "I'm not thinking anything yet," Corbin replied. "I'm just documenting." He took the page back and placed it in the folder. He closed it, picked up his pen. "The cause of death," the detective said evenly, "was a combination of medication and alcohol. There were no signs of violence. It was likely unintentional." A pause. But the conflict could have been a trigger. Stress on top of the medication he'd already taken. Corbin didn't raise his voice. He didn't apply pressure. He just laid out the words in the correct order. Liam sat motionless. No signs of violence. That meant he hadn't killed him. That was the first thought, sharp and quick. But it was followed by another, slower and heavier. The conflict could have been a trigger. His words, his hands on the man's collar, the slammed door, it was all part of the chain of events. It had become a link. Not murder, but not an accident either. Something in between. A place for which there was no clear term in the official report, but which Liam felt physically, somewhere in his chest, like a dull, steady blow. The recorder continued to run. Outside the office window, the courtyard remained gray, enclosed, with no exit to the street. Liam looked at the folder with Croft on the tab and understood. The legal trap was only part of it, the smaller part. The larger one was inside him. The realization that he had come because of Anna's call, had acted exactly as she had expected, and had walked out of that house at precisely the time someone else needed him to. The word last appeared before his name ever did. Liam read it by chance, over the shoulder of a man in line in front of him, on a local neighborhood forum on his phone. Heard the last visitor was an old friend, something about debts. The message had been posted at 7 in the morning. Arthur had been dead for less than 12 hours. He took his cup from the counter and moved to the window. The coffee shop on Main Street opened at 8, but by 9 it was already crowded. It was a small space with wooden tables and the smell of scorched milk. A place where people with time to kill or a desire to be seen would gather. Liam hadn't come here often before. Once after work, a couple of times while waiting to meet a foreman. Today, he came for no reason at all. He just couldn't stand being in his own apartment. The barista, a young guy with an earring, stopped mid-sentence as Liam approached the counter, then finished his thought after a beat. His face was a smooth, neutral mask. It was just the pause. At a table near the wall, two men were talking in low voices. One was explaining something, the other nodding along. Liam couldn't hear the words, but he could hear the tone of people discussing someone else's story with the detached pleasure of a curious spectator. He finished his coffee and set the cup on the windowsill. The glances weren't long or direct. They were sideways, quick, like they were taking a mental note. It was the way you look at someone you need to remember, just in case you have to add details later. Liam stepped outside, turned up the collar of his coat, and walked toward the bus stop. His phone rang as he was passing the old factory, its smokestacks jutting into the gray sky, its fence overgrown with rust. He answered without looking at the screen. "Liam," a voice said. It was Victor Lawson, a foreman from a construction firm on Industrial Way. "About the Forest Avenue job. We had to hand it over to another contractor." Liam stopped. "When?" "This morning." Lawson's voice was even, with no anger or particular sympathy. The businesslike tone used to deliver inconvenient news. The client called himself, said he didn't want... Well, the situation is uncomfortable. For his reputation. I haven't been charged with anything. "Liam," Lawson repeated, as if the name itself was the entire argument. "I get it. But until this blows over, it's better to have someone else finish the job. You know how it is these days." Liam stared at the factory fence. Last year's grass, pale and dry, pushed up between the iron bars. "Fine," he said, "as soon as things change." "Fine." He ended the call. In his pocket, the phone felt heavier than usual. Or maybe he just imagined it. The Forest Avenue project was 3 weeks of work, supposed to wrap up at the end of the month. Without it, his next rent payment would have to come from what was left of his last check. There wasn't much. He walked along the fence to the end of the block and turned toward home. The bills were lying on the entryway table. He'd been meaning to sort them by their due dates since Monday. He still hadn't. That evening, Mrs. Gable from the apartment across the hall came out to check her mail just as Liam was coming up the stairs. She was an elderly woman with a habit of always saying hello first. They'd run into each other a dozen times, and she always asked some pleasant, unnecessary question. How work was going, if it was cold out on the job site, if the upstairs neighbors were being noisy. Tonight, she saw him, dropped her gaze to her mailbox, and said nothing. He walked past. On the 3rd floor, at his own door, he took out his key. Before he could insert it, he heard the click of her lock from downstairs. The parking lot was quiet. 2 teenagers were sitting on the curb by the next building. One was talking on his phone, the other was looking in Liam's direction. He looked away when Liam glanced at him, then looked back again. In the grocery store, Liam picked up bread and milk. The cashier, a tired-looking middle-aged woman who usually scanned his items in silence, took her time, her eyes lingering on his face. Not aggressively, just for a long time. He paid, took his bag, and left. The story was spreading through the city with the speed of anything that fills a void, quickly, evenly, and without a discernible source. The conflict, the shouting, the death. Old friends and old debts. The last visitor. No one said anything to his face. No one proved anything. The city just stopped looking the other way. Detective Corbin saw him the next morning, without an appointment. Liam had driven there himself. The receptionist checked his ID and nodded him through. The office was on the 2nd floor, with the same gray window overlooking the inner courtyard. Anna Croft gave her statement, Corbin said. No preamble as usual. Liam sat. The detective's pen lay parallel to the edge of his notepad. She described the argument, mentioned your aggressive tone, said she was concerned but didn't intervene because she was afraid of escalating the situation.
She stood in the doorway and watched.
The security camera confirms that. Corbin turned a page. According to her, after you left, Arthur Croft seemed irritated but otherwise fine. She went to the kitchen. Then she heard a thud. Liam rubbed the bridge of his nose. Does the timeline match the logs? It does. Anna's story matched everything. The camera, the security log, the 911 call, it all lined up. Not a single inconsistency. And that was precisely what felt so strange. There's always something off in a witness's account. A tone, the sequence of events, a detail someone adds for emphasis. She didn't have a single extra detail. It's too clean, Liam said. Corbin looked at him. That's not a legal term, the detective said. With the department's permission, you can visit the scene. Tomorrow, with an officer present. Kevin Bailey silently logged his arrival time, 10:47 a.m. He looked at Liam with the same careful attention he'd give an unfamiliar car. Not hostile, but with no warmth. The barrier arm rose. The house stood in the same spot, pale siding, a neat lawn, a paver driveway. Inside, he was escorted by a young officer in plain clothes who introduced himself as Dennis. He kept his distance and stayed quiet, a useful skill. The entryway smelled the way houses do right after the living have left, not yet empty but no longer full. A leather jacket hung on a hook. A pair of men's sneakers sat by the wall. Liam walked into the kitchen. It was almost exactly as it had been that night. Almost. The space was white, open, with high ceilings. An island stood in the center, with matte light fixtures hanging above it. A stove, a range hood, shelves with identical storage containers. Anna liked symmetry. That much was obvious, even now. He stopped at the island and looked at the countertop. A glass was in the drying rack, the third one from the right, white with a blue stripe near the base. Liam stared at it for longer than he should have. That night, there had been two glasses, one with water on the desk in Arthur's study, and another that Anna had been holding as he walked through the kitchen. He hadn't seen a third one. Or he hadn't noticed. A bottle of whiskey, dark glass, stood at the left edge of the counter, closer to the window. Liam remembered Arthur pouring himself a drink. The bottle had been on the right, against the wall. It could mean nothing. Moving a bottle takes 3 seconds. After a death, people are in and out of the house. Detectives, forensic experts, paramedics. Anyone could have moved it. A blister pack of pills lay on a small tray next to the microwave. One rectangular slot was empty. Liam rubbed his wrist under his bracelet. Dennis was still standing in the doorway. Was this blister pack here that night? According to the inspection report, it was on the tray, Dennis replied. That matched. But the position of the empty slot, on the far left, the first one, looked different than if someone had casually popped a pill out without thinking. You open the first slot when you start a new pack. This wasn't the first. Liam didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Corbin showed him the footage that afternoon. The monitor on his desk was small, with a bluish glow. The camera angle captured the kitchen and part of the hallway, but the study itself was out of frame. On the screen, Arthur appeared from the edge of the frame. He walked toward the island, steadying himself with a hand on the counter. His movements were uneven, not drunk, more like exhausted. The tension from their argument hadn't left his body. He opened a cabinet, took out the bottle, poured a glass, raised it, and drank. Set the glass down. Reached for the blister pack. Anna appeared a few seconds later. She walked into the kitchen calmly, without rushing. She looked at him. He said something. The camera didn't record sound, and she remained silent. She stood by the island. Arthur took the pill. He put the blister pack down. A few minutes passed. The camera recorded a static image, 2 people in a kitchen, he at the island, she near the wall. Then Arthur swayed. He leaned on the counter, took a step back, and fell. Not sharply, but more like he crumpled, the way something heavy gives way when it stops resisting. Anna stepped toward him. She knelt down beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and she sat there. The recording continued. Nothing happened. She didn't get up. "The paramedics arrived at 9:43, Corbin said, his eyes still on the monitor. A pause. "Anna Croft called them at 9:40, 3 minutes before they arrived." Corbin turned off the recording. "Arthur collapsed at 9:22. Liam sat up straight. 18 minutes, he said. Yes. Corbin said it without intonation, just a number, a fact. He picked up his pen and wrote something in his notepad. 18 minutes. The camera didn't show a clock. It didn't show her face. The angle captured her in profile. But Liam had seen her hand. It rested on his shoulder, then she pulled it away. Anna sat next to a dying man, and her posture never changed. Her back was straight. Her hands were folded. He remembered the kitchen that night, how he'd walked to the door and seen her profile out of the corner of his eye, how she'd glanced down at her wrist. She was looking at her watch. Not at Arthur. At the watch face. At the time, he'd read it as coldness, a familiar, understandable detachment. A wife, tired of other people's drama in her own home. Now it read differently. 18 minutes was an interval with a beginning and an end. And if the beginning was marked by a glance at a watch, it meant she had been counting. Liam rubbed the bridge of his nose. He said, "She looked at her watch when I was leaving, at 9:02. You saw that?" "Yes." Corbin wrote it down, made a period. "I have a question," Corbin said. He opened the folder and took out the printout, placing it in front of Liam. "Regarding your text exchange with Anna Croft, this message here, from 2 weeks ago." Liam looked. The highlighted line, "Sometimes it feels like it would be easier if you were just gone." "What did you mean by that?" Liam looked away from the page. It was about work. He was leaning on the subcontractors, micromanaging every step. "I meant it would be easier to just close that line of business than to constantly have to justify everything to him." "Was it said in anger?" "Yes, professional anger." "I see." Corbin put the page back in the folder. "This excerpt has been included in the case file." Liam said nothing. The line was real. He had written it to Anna, a private message in response to her saying, "Arthur says you're dragging your feet." He'd typed it out in a moment of pure frustration, meaning the situation, shut down the project, walk away without a big fight. Not the person. But without context, the words meant something else entirely. And Anna had seen that when she read it. She'd received the message. She'd replied. And she had saved it. He understood now what exactly she had saved. The text message, the fight, his presence there that night, his departure exactly 38 minutes before the time of death. It was all being assembled into a structure. He hadn't built it, but it was being built around him. If he started talking about Anna, about the watch, the pause, the glass, the position of the pill pack, every word he said would be interpreted through the lens of that text. A man who writes, "It would be easier if he were just gone," and then starts pointing out evidence against the widow, doesn't look like a witness. He looks like an accomplice. Every move he made only tightened the pressure. Corbin closed the folder. He looked up. "That's all for today." He picked up his pen. "We'll let you know about the next steps." Liam stood up, put on his coat. The button fumbled before finding the hole. Outside the office window, the courtyard remained a closed-off space with no exit to the street. Just walls, a lamppost, and a car parked against the building. A space of control, like Arthur's study, like this entire city where the distance between any 2 points was a 20-minute drive, and the distance between any 2 people was even less. He walked out into the hallway. His footsteps echoed on the linoleum, dry and even. 18 minutes. The glass in the drying rack, the moved bottle, the glance at the watch, the text message written in a flash of anger and saved by her. The details were linking together, but the chain he was trying to build was also wrapping itself around him. He didn't sleep. Not in the sense of sleeping poorly or waking up. He went to bed at 11, lay there until 3, then got up, sat in the kitchen, and stared out the window until the horizon behind the vacant lot began to lighten. The 18 minutes circled in his head, like numbers he'd written down on a piece of paper but couldn't add up. At 6, he got dressed. At 7, he left. The police station opened at 8. At 8:20, Liam was standing at the curb, smoking his first cigarette in weeks. He'd gotten it from a man at the bus stop who handed it over in silence, no questions asked. When Corbin appeared in the hallway, he slowed for a second upon seeing Liam. "You're earlier than scheduled," the detective stated. It wasn't a question, just an observation. "I need to add to my statement." Corbin looked at him for a moment, then turned and walked toward his office. Liam followed. The recorder was switched on. The pen was placed parallel to the notepad. "I'm listening." Liam sat up straight. His shoulders had been slumped, and he consciously straightened them the way he sometimes did when he needed to hold something together that was falling apart inside. "It's about Anna Croft, after Arthur collapsed." "Go on." 18 minutes. That's not confusion. Liam delivered the line flatly, as if he'd rehearsed it. "When you see someone lose consciousness, you call 911. Immediately." She waited. Corbin didn't reply. He picked up his pen and jotted something down. "How do you know what she saw?" "From the video." She went over to him. She knelt down. That means she was assessing his condition, and she didn't call. "That's your interpretation." "It's 18 minutes. Corbin put down his pen. He looked at Liam with an attentiveness that was neither threatening nor supportive, just pure observation. "All right," he said. "Let's look at the timeline." The incident report was in the folder. Corbin opened it to the right page and turned it so Liam could see. Collapse recorded at 9:22:14 p.m. Call to 911 at 9:40:36 p.m. He traced the lines with his pen. The difference is 18 minutes and 22 seconds. Liam stared at the numbers. The medical examiner's report? It suggests that a timely call might have affected the outcome. Corbin paused. Not guaranteed. Might have. That's enough to raise a question of negligence. Enough for a question, not for an accusation. Corbin closed the report. Objectively, 18 minutes is a long time, an inexplicably long time for someone who is conscious and witnesses another person collapse. He looked up. The delay looks strange. Liam bit the inside of his cheek. The detective had said it evenly, with no emphasis on the word strange, but the word was there. It was the first real shift. Corbin opened his laptop and pulled up a file. The same monitor, the same bluish glow. This time he played it frame by frame, slower than before. Arthur appears from the left side of the frame. He's holding onto the island with his right hand. His shoulders are tense. He opens a cabinet on the lower right, takes out the bottle. He pours, drinks standing up, sets the glass down, reaches for the blister pack on the tray, pushes a pill out, washes it down with a sip from the same glass. Corbin paused the video. "Right here," he says, pointing at the blister pack Arthur places back on the tray. Anna Croft enters the room 27 seconds after this. The footage continues. Anna appears from the right. She walks steadily, stops at the island across from him. Arthur says something. His mouth moves. She looks at him, but either doesn't answer or answers briefly. The angle makes it hard to tell. 3 minutes and 8 seconds pass. Arthur sways forward, grabbing the edge of the island. His hand slips. He takes a step back and crumples. Not a sudden fall, more of a slide. First against the cabinet, then to the floor. Anna steps toward him, kneels, places 2 fingers on his neck, checking for a pulse. Holds them there for a few seconds. Then she stands up, walks over to the stove, stands there for a moment, walks back to the island. Corbin paused it again. They both stared at the frozen image. Anna by the island, Arthur on the floor by the cabinet. "There's no clear failure to act," Corbin said. She approached him, she checked his pulse. That registers as an action, but not as help. No, not as help. Liam looked at the screen. Her posture, back straight, arms at her sides, was exactly the same as when she had stood in the study doorway that night while he held Arthur by the collar. "We need to talk through the theory," Liam said. Corbin closed the laptop, picked up his pen. "I'm listening." "The fight was stage dressing. I came because Anna called, I caused a scene, and I left. Arthur died 38 minutes after I was gone. For the rest of the city, there's only one narrative. The last visitor, old debts, a conflict." Liam spoke evenly. "But if you look at it another way, my visit was necessary. It was to make me the last one," Corbin wrote. "Did she have a financial motive?" "I don't know the details of the will. We're looking into it." Corbin made a period. "What else supports this theory?" Liam rubbed the bridge of his nose. "The glance at her watch. As I was leaving, she looked at its face, not at me, not at the study I had just come out of, at her watch. If she was timing it from the moment he took the pill, that explains the pause." Corbin wrote it down, closed his notebook. "I'll schedule a joint interview." Anna Croft entered the office right on time. She wore a dark blue suit and closed-toe shoes. Her hair was pulled back. Her wedding ring was on. She walked to the chair placed at a slight angle from Liam's and sat down. There was a pause, her signature pause, before she spoke the first word. "Good afternoon." Corbin didn't reply. He opened his notebook. Liam watched her. She didn't look at him. She looked at the detective. "Mrs. Croft," Corbin began. "Liam Ward has raised a question about the time of your 911 call. 18 minutes after your husband lost consciousness. I'd like to hear your explanation." Anna folded her hands in her lap. "Arthur had been taking medication for anxiety for several years." Her voice was steady, unhurried. "He used to have episodes, rapid breathing, temporary disorientation. Sometimes he would sit or lie down on the floor on his own. It would pass after a few minutes." "You thought it was one of those episodes?" "At first, yes." A pause. "I checked his pulse. It was there. Faint, but it was there. I was waiting for him to come to." "Why didn't you call immediately if his pulse seemed faint?" "Because after his episodes he always came around. Always." Her posture didn't change. "When I realized this time was different, I called." Corbin wrote. He glanced at Liam. Liam said, "He didn't just sit on the floor. He collapsed. There's a difference." Anna turned to him. She held his gaze for just long enough, no more. "I understand it looks different from the outside. But I was there. You looked at your watch when I was leaving." A pause. "Yes. I wanted to see how much time had passed since Arthur took his pill." Corbin looked up. "Please clarify." "He wasn't supposed to take the medication without food, on an empty stomach. I wanted to check the time of his last meal." Anna turned back to the detective. "Mr. Ward interpreted that in his own way. I understand." Liam Ward knew about Arthur's condition. The sentence entered the conversation without transition, like something prepared in advance. Anna said it calmly, without looking at Liam. Corbin raised his pen. Explain. Liam and I discussed Arthur's condition several times. His anxiety disorder, the medication. Anna touched the face of her watch with her thumb, a quick, single motion. Liam Ward knew about the risks of combining the medication with alcohol. Corbin looked at Liam. Liam bit his cheek. We talked about it in general terms, not about specific doses. But you knew. In a general sense, yes. Corbin wrote, made a period. The folder opened. Corbin took out the printout and laid it on the desk so both of them could see it. The highlighted lines sat in the middle of the page, neatly marked in yellow. Sometimes it feels like it would be easier if he were just gone. Underneath the line was the date, 7 days before Arthur's death. This is your message, Corbin said, not a question. Yes. The context? I was writing about a job, about work, that it was easier to close out a project than to get approval for every single step. Corbin took out a second sheet and placed it next to the first. Here is the preceding message from Anna Croft. She writes, Arthur is pressuring you again. Your response is this sentence. Liam looked at the 2 pages. It was about a work situation. It was about Arthur Croft, Corbin said evenly. Anna added, her tone unchanged. Liam Ward said similar things out loud, more than once. That's not true. I understand you didn't perceive it that way. A pause. But that is how it sounded. Corbin turned a page in his notebook. Mr. Ward. At the time of the conflict, you were aware of Arthur Croft's medical condition. You knew about the medication. Yes. You did not warn him of the risks during your argument. I wasn't thinking about that in the moment. It was a fight. Understood. Corbin wrote, that could be classified as a possible failure to act, given your awareness of the situation. The phrase failure to act landed on the table between them, quietly, with no weight in the detective's voice. That's what made it so heavy. Anna said nothing. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded. Liam stared at the printout, at the yellow highlighter bleeding over his own words. He wanted to explain it all again, the context, the tone in which he'd written it, the bone-deep exhaustion after another argument with Arthur, who had once again framed his help as a debt. He wanted to say that the words were about business, about a contract, about how it was easier to just walk away than to keep explaining himself. But any explanation would sound like an excuse, and an excuse, uttered next to that highlighted line, would be read as a confession. Corbin set down his pen, aligning it perfectly with the edge of his notepad. The silence stretched for several seconds, the kind of intentional pause a detective uses to create a space for something that needs to be said. Mr. Ward, is there anything else you'd like to add? The question was the same one he'd asked at the beginning of the investigation, but it was entirely different now. Then it had been an invitation to speak. Now it was a boundary. Liam understood what lay beyond it. If he kept talking about Anna, the watch, the pause, the glass in the drying rack, the moved bottle, the investigation would dig deeper into their text history, the entire correspondence, the context, which he no longer controlled. Sentence after sentence, each one stripped of tone, leaving only the words. A man who writes, "It would be easier if he were just gone," and then points a finger at the widow didn't look like a witness. He looked like an accomplice covering his tracks. Anna sat across from him, poised, calm, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't gloating. She was simply waiting. She knew how to wait. Liam looked at the papers on the table, at the yellow marker bleeding over his own words. The recording proved the pause, but not the intent. The text message created a motive for him. Anyone could have put the glass in the drying rack. The bottle wasn't where he remembered it, but he knew memory was unreliable after a stressful event. He had come here this morning intending to speak, to push back. It had felt like the first forward motion in days, a fragile hope he barely dared to name. Now he saw where that motion led. Corbin waited, his pen lying parallel to his notepad. Anna watched the detective. Liam said nothing. The hope he had brought with him that morning, the one that felt real as he stood on the curb with a stranger's cigarette, crumbled not with a crash, but in silence. Like plaster flaking from the edges of an old crack, unnoticed until it's gone for good. There was no proof of direct intent. The recording showed a delay, but not a crime. The text showed his frustration, his words, and any other word he uttered here would only become more evidence against him. He realized the offensive had turned against him before he'd even seen it coming. Corbin delivered the news without preamble, the way a weatherman gives a forecast. Formally, the elements of a crime have not been established. The ME confirmed the cause of death was a combination of medication and alcohol. There are no signs of foul play. The folder lay open. The pen was parallel to the notepad, as always. However, the file documents a conflict, the text messages, and emotional pressure. Corbin paused. Your status remains unresolved. Liam looked at the page of the report. Columns of numbers, a timeline, names. His name was in the middle, not at the end. Not a suspect, he said. No. But not cleared either. For now you're a witness with unanswered questions. Corbin closed the file. Any new theory could change the course of the investigation. It was said neutrally. No threat, no hint, just a fact like everything else Corbin had uttered over the past few days. Liam stood up. He put on his coat. This time the button found its hole on the first try. A newsstand stood by the subway entrance, small and cluttered, with yellowed stickers on the glass. Liam bought a bottle of water, his eyes catching a headline on display. In the City Blogs column, there were 3 paragraphs. He only read the first. Conflict between longtime acquaintances preceded tragedy. The word tragedy was right there next to his name. Not directly, but close enough, separated by commas and dashes. His phone vibrated. Victor Lawson. Liam declined the call and put the phone in his pocket. Lawson didn't call back. That was an answer in itself. A notification from his bank came next, a payment reminder due in 8 days. The amount wasn't huge, but without the Forest Avenue contract, it felt tangible, concrete. He walked past the newsstand, past the bus stop, past 3 people in line at the ATM. One of them glanced at him, a quick, sideways look, then turned away. Mrs. Gable from across the hall would probably lock her door a little quicker tonight. The city doesn't scream at you. It just stops opening its doors. Anna Croft appeared in the police station hallway earlier than scheduled. Dark suit, closed-toe shoes. No unnecessary jewelry. The wedding ring was still on. She walked past Liam without slowing her pace, offering a brief nod, not to him, but to the space around him. In the office, Corbin asked follow-up questions about her previous statement, clarifying details. Anna answered concisely, without pausing where it wasn't needed. Her voice was level. Her words were as precise as the items on her kitchen counter. Everything in its place, nothing superfluous. Liam sat slightly to the side, observing. She never looked back at him. She didn't check his reaction. She did nothing to suggest nervousness or calculation, at least nothing visible. Corbin closed his notebook. Mrs. Croft, I have no more questions for you today. She stood, walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused for a fraction of a second and touched the face of her watch with her thumb. Liam caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. Then she was gone. The composure she maintained wasn't an absence of something. It was a presence, dense
and organized, like the rooms in her house where every object was placed with symmetry and nothing ever moved on its own.
Corbin turned to Liam. "I need to speak with you separately." He opened a different folder, this one thinner than the last. He took out a single sheet. The negligence theory could be pursued. The 18 minutes remained the key detail. Corbin placed the sheet on the desk. "If you officially confirm your suspicions, the case will move to another level." Liam looked at the paper. It was the same timeline he had seen several times before. 9:22, 9:40. What does another level mean? Negligent homicide. A different charge, a different scope of investigation. And me? Corbin narrowed his left eye. "If you officially confirm your suspicions, the investigation will examine everything related to it, including the nature of your relationship with Anna Croft, the text messages." Liam understood what that implied. He said, "You're offering me a choice." "I'm informing you of your procedural options." His apartment greeted him with silence and the familiar, never-before-bothersome smell of old pipes. He took off his coat and hung it on the hook. He went into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. 3 envelopes lay on the table, bills he still hadn't sorted from last week. Liam put the kettle on and sat down. He'd printed a copy of the text exchange himself at a copy shop since he didn't own a printer. It was in his coat pocket. He took it out and laid it on the table next to the envelopes. The highlighted line stared up at him. "Sometimes it feels like it would be easier if he were just gone." He'd written it in a fit of irritation after talking to Anna, after she'd told him Arthur was complaining about the contract again. It was around 11 at night, and he'd been sitting in his car in a store parking lot, typing without thinking. He'd sent it, and forgotten about it. Now it lay on the page under a yellow highlighter, physical evidence of something he hadn't done, or had almost done. The kettle clicked off. He didn't get up. If he pressed forward, officially confirmed his statement against Anna, the investigation would subpoena their entire message history. 3 months of texts. There were other messages, not as sharp, but the context could be twisted. A man who writes something like that, then shows up, gets into a physical fight, leaves 38 minutes before a death, and then starts pointing out evidence against the widow. That wasn't a defense, it was a narrative. Someone else's, but with his name on it. He put the paper back in his pocket. Arthur was dead. That was a fact, no matter how you looked at it. Liam remembered his voice, smooth, with the confident tone of a man who assumes he's being listened to. "You were useful, nothing more." 5 words, spoken without malice, which is what had made them so unbearable. He remembered 15 years ago, when Arthur had been the first to offer him a hand, not metaphorically but literally, in a hospital corridor, when Liam was lying on a gurney after a 3-day binge, staring at the ceiling. Arthur hadn't said anything about helping then. He just sat beside him and waited. Later, the help became the language of debt. Contracts became favors. Every meeting was another reminder of who owed what to whom. It didn't happen overnight or out of malice. It was just Arthur's way. He gave people things they couldn't refuse and then converted that generosity into the foundation of his own importance. Liam had lived inside that system for 14 years. And now, sitting in his kitchen with an unpoured cooling kettle, he understood. His desire to blame Anna wasn't about justice. It was the same old reflex. A need to prove he wasn't just useful, that he meant something in this chain of events, that his presence that night wasn't just random scenery for someone else's play. The fight was what kept him trapped inside it. It always had. The next morning he went to see Corbin without an appointment. The receptionist nodded him through. The office was the same. The folder lay open on the desk. The recorder was on. Corbin looked up. "Mr. Ward." "I need to resolve this," Liam said. "Regarding the official statement against Anna Croft." Corbin picked up his pen. "I'm listening." Liam sat. He looked at the folder, at the timeline, at the signature at the bottom of the report. For days he had looked at this desk and seen a trap. Now he just saw a desk. 18 minutes is a fact. The delayed call is a fact, he said evenly. But I have no proof of intent, no direct action. I have my interpretation, and I have a text history that makes my interpretation dangerous. Corbin listened. "I will not be pressing the negligence theory, officially." A pause. Corbin didn't rush him. The pen was in his hand, but he wasn't writing. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" The question sounded exactly the same as it had during the joint interview. The same voice, the same inflection, no pressure. "No," Liam said. Corbin put the pen down, wrote a short note, closed the folder. "Very well." He picked up another sheet of paper. Then, procedurally, the case is classified as an accidental death with signs of possible negligence. There is insufficient evidence of intent. Anna Croft will not face criminal charges at this time. Corbin looked up. "Your status is changed to witness without further questions. You're free to go." The hallway was long, lit by fluorescent lamps overhead. Liam walked toward the exit. His footsteps on the linoleum sounded just as they had the first time, dry and even. He stopped at the door. Not because he was having second thoughts. He just paused for a second, the way you do before stepping out into the cold when the first breath hits you. Then he opened the door and walked out. The autumn air was cold. Not damp, just cold. A crisp, clear cold that smelled of wet concrete. The sky was a flat, even gray without a single cloud. Liam stopped on the steps and buttoned his coat to the top. His phone was silent. Not a single notification. Not from Lawson, not from the bank, not from any of the online forums where his name was circulating next to the word tragedy. Just silence in his pocket. He walked down the steps to the sidewalk. He passed a parked car, a trash can, two women with shopping bags who were talking and didn't look at him. Ordinary people on an ordinary day. 5 minutes later, the old factory came into view on his right, the smokestacks, the rusted fence, last year's grass growing between the bars. He had passed it so many times he'd stopped seeing it. Today, he saw it. 34 years in this city. A triangle formed by the suburbs, downtown, and his neighborhood. A circuit he could drive in 20 minutes and had never left. Not because he couldn't, but because he'd always felt he had to settle his accounts first. With Arthur. With his addiction. With a debt that had no fixed amount, because the terms were always being recalculated for him. Arthur was dead. There was no one left to settle with. It wasn't a relief, not the kind Liam would have expected, if he'd expected anything at all. It was more like a vacuum. A space where something heavy used to be, and now it was gone. But his muscles still remembered the strain. He reached the riverfront. The water was as gray as the sky. It was early, and the place was empty except for some ducks near the bank, and an old woman walking her dog far in the distance. He stopped at the railing and laid his hands on the cold metal. A thin leather bracelet was on his wrist. He'd worn it for 6 years, ever since he got clean. It wasn't jewelry. It was a reminder that there had been a point after which things had changed. He didn't take it off now. The hatred had been real. He understood that now, without trying to excuse it. When Arthur had said, "You were useful, nothing more," something inside him had resonated with it so perfectly that it was clear the words hadn't landed by accident. They had found the exact spot where it already hurt.
An old feeling that had lived in him since he was 19 at his father's funeral, standing by the casket and thinking, I never became who he wanted me to be. The hatred for Arthur was real, and that hatred had become part of the chain, not because he had killed him, but because he had shown up. He had given in. He had played the part he was assigned. He hadn't killed him. That was also true. Both things were true at once, and there was no contradiction between them, only an uncomfortable space where he just had to stand.
The river flowed. The ducks paid him no attention. He took his hands off the railing. Lawson wouldn't call him back. He would have to find other jobs. The money in his account would last another 3 weeks if he was careful. Mrs. Gable would eventually start saying hello again, or she wouldn't, but that no longer felt like something important. For the first time in years, he didn't owe a debt to a specific person. There was no obligation to show up when called, to explain delays, to listen as help was converted into the currency of guilt. He hadn't won. There was no applause. Anna Croft was sitting in her house on the hill, and whatever she had or hadn't done that night remained unanswered. But he had walked out of that building with no new obligations, without another move he was forced to make to prove something to someone. He had just walked out. And that was enough. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He turned and started walking along the riverfront, quickly, with no particular destination, the way people walk when they have an empty day ahead and haven't yet decided what to do with it.